So I'm here in my office, Lawyers Committee on Nuclear Policy in New York City. We're just across the street from the United Nations, and now since June 15th, negotiations on a nuclear weapons prohibition treaty have been taking place. And I and other NGOs have been closely monitoring and to some extent even participating in the negotiations. They're supposed to wrap up by July 7th in the hope of the states leading the effort, states like Costa Rica, Austria, Mexico, Ireland, South Africa, Brazil. The hope of the leaders is that they will have agreed a treaty by July 7th. The nuclear-armed states and their closest allies are not participating, with the exception of Netherlands, which has, due probably to pressure from its own public, as expressed in its parliament, has been participating and has been saying a lot, raising a lot of objections to various aspects of the treaty. So the president, Ambassador Elaine White of Costa Rica, and her team, including the United Nations Office for Disarmament Affairs, have produced a second draft of a treaty earlier this week. And the preamble looks to be in quite good shape. It has a lot of strong elements that the International Association of Lawyers Against Nuclear Arms, my organization, is happy about. It recognizes the illegality of use of nuclear weapons. It uses the language of the International Court of Justice on the obligation to pursue and conclude negotiations on nuclear disarmament. Based on the initiative this grew out of, it refers to the catastrophic and unacceptable consequences of nuclear explosions, and it has much more. So the preamble is strong. Article 1 of the treaty sets out basic prohibitions for states that are members of the treaty. So it's prohibited to develop, produce, manufacture, possess, stockpile, transfer nuclear weapons. Well, this is the heart of the treaty. This is what it's supposed to be about, prohibitions. Because the entire rationale of this effort was that progress wasn't really being made on nuclear arms control and disarmament. It was time to change the paradigm and set out the prohibitions that could provide a framework for the elimination eventually of nuclear arsenals. There's also in Article 1 a prohibition of nuclear explosive testing. We are advocating, and many governments are calling for an explicit prohibition of threatened use of nuclear weapons to go along with the prohibition of use of nuclear weapons that's already in Article 1. That's a contested question, but it seems very possible that a prohibition of threat of use of nuclear weapons will get into the treaty. There's also a clear prohibition of allowing stationing or deployment of nuclear weapons in a country which is a member of the treaty. So if Germany or Belgium or other European countries that host U.S. nuclear bombs were to join the treaty, they would have to end so-called nuclear sharing. Now, the next section of the treaty is Articles 2 to 5, and they have to do with how nuclear-armed states would join the treaty for the most part. That's a very difficult question to resolve, since the nuclear-armed states are not here to negotiate about it. So the diplomats are struggling mightily, but they'll probably come up with something that at least is plausible. They want to signal that the treaty is open to all states, including countries that have nuclear weapons. Interestingly, in what is now Article 7, there are obligations to assist victims and of nuclear testing and use of nuclear weapons, and to clean up environmental areas which have been contaminated by nuclear testing nuclear testing, basically. This reflects the fact that there was a humanitarian initiative that led to this treaty negotiation with a lot of emphasis on the role of victims of nuclear weapons, in particular the Hibakusha, the survivors of the U.S. atomic bombings in 1945. It looks like those provisions are going to be in the treaty. It doesn't appear there's really going to be a administrative body or agency for the treaty. The job will be given to the Office for Disarmament Affairs of the United Nations. But it does seem there will be fairly active follow-up in terms of governance of the treaty after it's adopted. Meetings of state parties, review conferences, the ability to adopt supplementary agreements known as protocols. So the provisions will be in place for there to be implementation and building on this treaty. So there are a number of other issues, and you can learn about them either on the UN website, the Office for Disarmament Affairs, or reachingcriticalwill.org. But I won't try to cover every single issue. I will say that the spirit among civil society and diplomats has been quite good, quite constructive. They're really trying to, first of all, make a political moral statement that goes beyond General Assembly resolutions, that's more definitive. A treaty is a more definitive political, moral, legal statement. But secondly, to provide some basis for further efforts in the direction of achieving a world free of nuclear weapons.